Hi, I'm Oliver at the International Macrobiotics School, and I want to talk about hay fever in this talk, how to heal it. Interesting, interesting kind of problem. In the UK, I think out of I don't know what it is now, 65 million people, something like that. About 7 million, 6, 7 million people suffer from hay fever. So it's something like 10% of the population. This is, you could say, a kind of allergy to our natural environment, to pollen from trees and flowers and to nature. This is very curious. How is it that we are having an allergy to nature? Nature we've lived in for the last millions of years, ever since we were humans and before we were humans, we were living in nature. You would think that if the problem was the environment, then the body would have adapted and found ways not to be bothered by pollen. So, but in modern this is a very common problem in modern culture. In traditional cultures, it's almost non-existent. 50 years ago, it was much less common. So, really, hay fever is primarily a modern diet and lifestyle caused problem. So, what is happening with hay fever? The the symptoms probably everybody knows. It's when certain pollens are around in the air. These really irritate the mucous membranes, and then it becomes painful. The eyes can be watering. The sinuses can feel full. There can be extra mucus, and actually, what's happening here also has an effect on our brain function. So it can also make you feel rather fuzzy brain, difficult to think clearly, and so on. So why is it that this pollen and this natural materials are having such a big effect? The macrobiotic understanding is that the mucous membrane inside of our nose and sinuses and down our throat needs to form a tight barrier. It needs to be moist and quite thin, and yet it needs to form a barrier to keep pollen, bacteria, viruses, etc. out. And when people develop hay fever, this is because that barrier has become weak and porous, and then the pollen gets into the body. The body thinks it's being attacked. It recognizes these proteins are not me; they're foreign. And then it sets up an attack. And the way the way the body first responds to an attack is with inflammation, sending a lot of blood, white blood cells, defensive cells, etc., and certain chemicals, kind of histamine type histamines and other chemicals to help fight what it thinks is an attack. And then we get, then the nose and the mucous membranes swell up, and the eyes swell up, and then we get all the unpleasant symptoms. So the question is, why are these pollens? Why has the mucous membrane become porous? Which Western medicine hasn't really worked out yet. So it gives antihistamines and so on, but having seen a lot of people with hay fever, this is a problem which can be relatively easily healed. It takes time. I've seen a lot of people, get into changing their diet, and the next year experience no symptoms or much reduced symptoms, and maybe in another year or two, it just clears up. This is really mostly down to foods. Certain foods create tightness in the body, create structure, and other foods are more watery and expansive and make those cells of the mucous membrane expand and then become leaky, and then the pollen gets in and you get inflammation. So the foods which cause leakiness, well, cause the mucous membrane to expand and become leaky. To some extent, fruit. Everybody thinks fruit is healthy, so the more the better. But everything is in balance. We can have too little or too much of anything. For if you so I'm starting off with fruit because it's easier to imagine. Fruit, what is the nature of fruit? It's soft, sweet, and watery. If we eat a lot of fruit, then our mucous membranes and other parts of the body also become soft and watery. You might have noticed that if you eat a lot of fruit and also sweet, sugary foods or alcohol, and all of these foods have an expansive effect on the mucous membrane, that you might sneeze afterwards. What happens when you sneeze? The body contracts, and what comes out of your nose? Fluid. That's sneezing a lot is a sign that there's too much fluid in your mucous membrane. And the body is doing its best to try and get rid of it because it doesn't want to have that fluid there and it's irritating. So eating a little, if you live in a temperate climate, temperate fruits. If you live in a tropical climate, tropical fruits. Eating small amounts of fruit generally is quite healthy for the body because it's more relaxing and there's some sweetness. But overdoing fruit, and especially fruit juices, and if you're in a temperate climate, eating a lot of tropical fruits, so that is things like bananas, oranges, pineapple, mangoes, kiwi fruits, etc., will definitely contribute to hay fever. Even more so, sugar has a very expansive effect. Also, alcohol, to some extent, caffeine, to some extent, spices. To a small extent, the nightshade vegetables. Also refined foods which are lacking in fiber. Foods which have whole grains, whole vegetables, whole beans, etc., have a lot of fiber in. These create structure and create strength in structures, including in the mucous membrane. So foods which are going to help: whole grains, whole beans, whole vegetables, root vegetables, greens, kale, broccoli, etc. Seeds, nuts, sea vegetables are useful in a plant-based diet because they're very rich in minerals. Soups are great. A bit of salt and salty seasonings because that creates more contraction and strength in tissues. Maybe some animal food, maybe some fish, shellfish, or occasional egg or something like that. But one really also needs to not be eating a lot of meat, eggs, cheese, because if we eat a lot of those foods which are more dense and create more heat and contraction and tension in the body, then inevitably we want to have a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, a piece of cake, some alcohol, something sweet or something like that in order to make balance, to then relax us. So it doesn't work to continue eating a lot of meat, eggs, cheese, overly salty foods. You cannot cut down on the strong, expansive yin foods, sugar, caffeine, etc. If you do. So it's going for that more balanced diet, which we would call, which is kind of the more macrobiotic approach, eating more balanced foods. Of course, we need some sweetness in our diet. Good to get that primarily from vegetables, from roasted vegetables, using sweet potatoes, parsnips, carrots. If you make a soup, fry the onions very well so the soup becomes sweet. Plus a small amount of more temperate climate fruits, apples, pears, berries, but not too much, and preferably cooked with a few grains of salt, because then the fruit's going to have less expansive effect than eating raw fruit. If you're a raw fruit addict, you may find it difficult at first, but if you balance up the rest of your diet, then you'll find it easier to gradually reduce your raw fruit intake. So this is quite a big change for people who are eating a kind of standard Western diet, standard Western diet that used to be meat, dairy, and sugar, and a small amount of refined grains. So it can be difficult for those people, but also for a lot of people these days who are going for a much lighter way of eating, often start breakfast with a smoothie containing fruits, maybe vegetables, maybe some sweeteners. That food is really not good for hay fever or for the health of the lungs or the large intestine and certain other organs in the body. Vegetable juices, fine. But a lot of fruit juice, a lot of fruit sugars, as Western nutrition is beginning to realize, the NHS now recommends not to overeat fruit and to include that as one's sugar intake. Excess fruits may give you a bit of a high as you get that little burst of expansive energy and fruit sugars, but really is not good for the lungs, for our immunity, and also for not having allergies. So I hope that gives you a quick idea. It means being kind of quite religious about following that way of eating, finding alternatives to sugar, alternatives to caffeine, mostly staying off alcohol for a period of time. When it's really possible to strengthen the mucous membranes and strengthen the lung function as a whole, and then you can enjoy the odd coffee, the odd alcohol, some quite sweet food sometimes, and it won't create the hay fever. But if you start overdoing those foods, the imbalance builds up again. The mucous membrane gets waterlogged, gets squidgy, can't do its job, gets leaky, pollen gets in. Hay fever, body reacts with inflammation, and then the hay fever's back. So I hope that gives you an idea of how, if you have hay fever, how you could heal it. If you'd like some personal advice, please do go to the school website and get in touch with me, or attend some cooking or other classes. I've seen really quite a large number of people heal their hay fever using a macrobiotic approach. So it's not something that one has to go on suffering for the rest of one's life. Okay, good luck.